Okay, let's talk about how dangerous a job title can become. Not because the job title is necessarily wrong, right? There are instances where you should have a specific job title and they're playing in your face, right? Um, but because after a while, you may begin to believe it is the whole story about who you are. And let me give you a quick story. Allow me. A few years ago, when I was switching from government job to a tech job, I sat in a final interview after 5 rounds of conversations. Five. By then, they had obviously seen my resume. We'd had conversations. And if you watch some of my other videos, you know that I got this job because I was through LinkedIn. I was doing informational interviews, and then through that, I finally got an interview. And I'll get into that a little bit later, how to pivot and break into different industries. But I share that to say we've had several touch points where they knew my experience and they knew my work had been in nonprofits, government, and schools. And still, yet still, in that final interview, the CEO and founder looked at the story of my career and essentially asked, can you actually hack it in tech? And I was just like, yeah, duh. So on the outside, very quickly and with confidence, because literally half of the game is confidence, I was like, yes, I'm very excited to be here. And I know I can definitely succeed because I'm excited about XYZ. And this is why I talk about this in other videos a lot. I talk about listening in each interview. I know a lot of people get upset when they see that they need to do 4, 5, 6 interviews, but especially when you work in tech or when you are in a higher position, those several interviews actually give you data. And in this instance, it gave me data where I was able to go back to all the things I'd heard along the way and say, oh, this is where the company is going. This is where the company wants to succeed. So when he asked me the question around, do you think you can hack it in tech? Do you think you'd be successful here because of your nonprofit government background? I was just like, yes, because insert vision statement here, insert my receipts here. You understand? And that is what gives me the confidence. Because quite frankly, what do you think I'm going to say after I've spent 5 rounds of interviews? Actually, no, sir, I can't hack this job. I'm just here for and giggles, please. Okay. So I said yes. But inside, truthfully, inside, another voice said, can you? Can I actually do this? Are you qualified for this? And the reason, as I mentioned earlier, I'd spent some time trying to pivot from government to tech, and it wasn't an easy journey. He wasn't the first person to read my career that way. He definitely wasn't the last. But also, I knew I had been reading my career in that way too. Nonprofit, government, schools, social work. And what happens is that all these labels carry a few assumptions. It carries the assumption that it's slow moving, it's bureaucratic, it's mission driven, but not commercially minded. Meaning that if I'm working in nonprofits and schools and all these places, I have a goal in mind. I want to help people, save people, whatever it is, but I do not necessarily want to make money, right? When you think about a social worker, you do not think about, oh, she's maximizing profit and shareholder value, okay? And that's what he wanted. That is what commercially minded means. So what you also think is that I'm good with people, but perhaps I'm not technical. You might also think I'm accustomed to structure rather than the speed and ambiguity of a growing company. So when he asked whether I could hack it in tech, I think that was the question underneath the question. Could I move fast? Could I think commercially? Could I learn technology? Could I move in ambiguity? Could I produce results in an environment where instructions might still be getting written? In fact, I was probably writing those rules, even though it was my first time doing. And that's exactly what happens in tech. Every label seemed to tell him where I had already been. And therefore, where I had already been, in his mind, I wasn't necessarily prepared for what was next. And even though part of the trouble was that I was wondering the same thing, I knew I had to say it differently. And I'm grateful that I did, and I've had almost, mm, 6 years of experience in tech. Okay, so now I can look back and say, "I can do it." So maybe That is where you are now. You are in that middle space where you're transitioning and you're asking yourself certain questions. The people who are the gatekeepers to where you want to go are asking you certain questions, and you don't know how to answer, even though somehow you do everything in your role. You organize the program, you manage the people, you fix the process, you calm down the stakeholder, you train the new person. And because apparently nobody has like the same skill set you have, you do everything. But when it's time to choose your next move, you cannot name one thing that you're qualified to do. So you say things like, I don't know what else I'm qualified for. Um, this is all I've ever done. My resume has this industry all over it. I want out, but I don't know how to start over. And maybe I don't want to start over, right? You have experience everywhere and permission nowhere. This is troubling, right? Because where do you go from there? And this is what I've learned, that people can read all your labels. And I had to learn how to read the pattern. So it's not only the labels, but also read the pattern attached to those labels. Because a job title is only the container carrying your ability. And sometimes we become so attached to the container that we forget to ask what has been carrying inside of that. So a person says, I'm a program coordinator. Fine, great. But what does that mean when the work begins? The container, the label is program coordinator, but what's underneath that? And it may mean leadership brings you an idea with no structure, no timeline, and no clear owner. And by Friday, you have turned it into something people can actually execute, people can actually partake in. It may mean five stakeholders enter a meeting speaking five different professional languages, and you're the person who helps it understand one another. And an example of this is when I was a school social worker, I had the principal in the room, I had the teacher in the room, I had maybe truancy in the room. I had a few different stakeholders who wanted slightly different things from the student. And it was my job to make sure by the time we walked out, everyone got what they needed, or at least they were comfortable enough with like they were getting enough of what they needed. The teacher was getting the student handed in homework and not walking in late to class. The the principal was making sure that attendance didn't look weird. The guidance counselor, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what it was. It may be mean you notice what is about to fall apart before anybody else can even see the crack. But because your organization has called all of that coordination coordinator, you call yourself a coordinator. And the container has named the seed, and that is the problem. You haven't named your seed. And but also notice everything I said. So if you remember what I said at the beginning of the video about my future boss, the CEO, worried about, can I handle ambiguity? Can I handle stakeholder frustration and miscommunication? The things I just listed as coordinator are things that anyone in a nonprofit, in a school, in government is doing. So the work from nonprofit to tech is not that different. We're just calling it different things, right? So when I talk about the seed, there's a seed in you that could change your life if you allow yourself to explore it. And I'm not talking about some secret passion that requires a silent retreat, three personality tests, a sabbatical, or even a vision board to uncover. I'm talking about the ability that is already visible in the work that you do. You may have simply dismissed it as it's just part of my job. And for me, across five career pivots, my containers kept changing. Social work, government, education, technology, AI training enablements, change manager. If you read only the labels of my job titles, my career looks like a woman who cannot make up her mind. But if you read the pattern, the same ability appears again and again, and that's translation. I take complicated things, understand the people affected by them, and make those things usable. As a social worker, I translated systems and resources for students and families. In government and education, I translated programs, policies, and opportunities. In technology, I translated products and processes so people could understand them. use them, and move through change. The titles change, the industries change. However, the seed did not change. I wish I had a seed. Seed did not change. I did not start my career over 5 times. I learned how to move the same seed into better soil. And this is where I want you to look at your own work differently, because the containers that we have really impact our seeds. So I don't know if you're a plant mama, plant daddy, plant auntie, whatever you may be. I love me some plants. And what you realize is that also what I've low key realized, I love getting plants from Trader Joe's. For some reason, those plants never die. They never die. I've tried getting plants from Home Depot, from nurseries, but my Trader Joe's plants, Joe be putting something in there because they never died. They just be growing. Now, if you walk into Trader Joe's, for the most part, you're going to get a plant that is pretty small. It fits into like a little container like this, right? And over the years, your plant is growing. As your plant grows, you are not going to keep your plants in that little container. If you keep it in that little container, the roots lock and they kind of suffocate themselves, right? If you keep it in that container, it doesn't have the full ability to grow to its extent. However, if you keep changing the container, it has more and more room to grow. Now, I want to come back to that roots analogy, because when the roots start wrapping around each other and they start suffocating each other, the plant has a hard time. And your seed, your ability, your through line, your talent is those roots. I have, as I mentioned earlier, I've gone from very different industries and very different job titles, but my roots, my very fundamental of the skill set I bring to anything that I do, my ability to translate, my ability to talk to different stakeholders, that has stayed the same. However, if I stayed in the same container and as I was growing and learning and expanding, if I felt suffocated because there was no place for me to go, that I would have just imploded on myself. And that's when you start having like you start getting disengaged, you have burnout because you want to do more but you can't, so then you kind of just like shut down. However, if you're able to really understand what your through line is, what your skill set is, then you change to another pot and the roots just get deeper and deeper, right? So your pots are changing but your roots are growing and spreading and getting more entrenched. Right. And I'll stop the plant analogies there because we can go on and on about how when a root really sticks, you could do whatever you want, but you cannot take that thing out. And that's what we want for your career. You might change the titles, even the industries of what you do, but your core skill set, the thing that makes you you in any room and makes you excel, and for people to look at you and say, oh my gosh, she does that so well, but they can't replicate, that's what we want for you. So, if you're looking for this, do not begin with what is my title, but rather ask what happens because I am here. When you enter a confused project, does it become organized? When people feel overwhelmed, do they become calmer because you're in the room? When information is complicated, does it become understandable because of how you explain it? When nobody knows how to move forward, do you create the next step? What repeatable what repeatedly changes because you were present? And that is your first clue. Excuse me. Then ask, what am I actually doing underneath my task? Maybe you say I schedule meetings, but what are you doing underneath that? Right? You may be negotiating competing priorities. You may be deciding what information each person needs before the meeting. You may be noticing where communication has broken down. You may be documenting decisions and keeping their work from stalling. Scheduling meetings is the visible task. It's a thing everyone has been educated to understand easily. But creating momentum is the deeper ability. Maybe you say, I answer student questions. But underneath that task, you may be helping people navigate complex systems, interpreting policy, building trust, and supporting decisions with real consequences. Answering questions is a task. Helping people move through uncertainty is the ability. Maybe you say, I help wherever I'm needed. And that can mean you're adaptable. It can mean that you diagnose gaps quickly. It can mean you can move between different stakeholders and understand what each of them needs. But because you've always described it as helping other people, you are kind of like missing the skill set. Like it's in you, but you're not seeing it. Yeah. And if you aren't able to see it, maybe other people are seeing it. But unfortunately, the way corporate works is that you have to voice it. And I'll give you an example. I've told you all the different pivots I've done, and there was I had a little bit of a gap in my I had time essentially at work. And I noticed that my coworker, who at that time before I was in this role, change management, was kind of behind. So I said, Hey, would you love me to help? And her response was like, Oh, I'm 100% you can do this, but I wasn't sure if you thought you could do it. Fast forward 3 months later, I have my own projects. Okay. So sometimes other people see it in you, but you need to see it in yourself and voice it out. Or maybe sometimes other people cannot see the skill and you need to voice that out as well. So life is complicated, but asking these questions above helps. Because ultimately, what I'm getting at is one thing describes maybe what your hands were doing, the other reveals what you made possible. And you want to ask your question so you can see what's made possible, and that is what moves you forward. That is what allows you to pivot. That's what allows you to get paid. Then you can ask the questions that create motion. Where else is this result needed? Not what other jobs can a program coordinator do, because that search may hand you another coordinator job wearing a fresh blazer, and that's not what you want, right? Instead, search for environments that need the results that you create. If you bring structure to ambiguous work, look at project management, implementation, operations, program management. If you help people adopt new systems, look at enablement, training, customer education, implementation, or change management. If you build trust and keep multiple projects aligned, look at, or not even projects, if you can build trust and keep multiple groups aligned, there we go, look at partnerships, customer success, community management, or stakeholder engagement. All those are more people centered. I was thinking about programs. These are not automatic matches, right? It's just because one does not equal the other. We're not doing like a career manifestation situation here, but your experience becomes evidence rather than magic. And you still have to study the new role. You have to identify your gaps. You have to learn the language or of the new field and prove that you can produce a result of that environment. But that is very different from starting over. You're not arriving empty handed, right? And if part of what keeps you stuck is something different, maybe part of what's keeping you stuck is I went to school for this. If everything above, you're kind of like nodding and saying, okay, but then you're still thinking to yourself, but what about all my education? What about all the hard work that I've done? I want you to go find your transcript. And not because your transcript gets to dictate your next move, but I want you to go back and look for clues. Which classes taught you how to think? Which assignments came naturally to you? Which problems held your attention? What did your education teach you to notice that somebody without your background might miss? Your degree is simply evidence of what you studied, right? And some of you might even go back and you can't even find your transcript. Why? Because it's low key, not something that you need for your day to day job, right? And I do want to kind of drill that down. Some of us get so stuck on our education, and we need to realize that our education is not a boundary of what you're allowed to do or allowed to become. Literally, our education is meant to free us. Our education is meant to teach us how to think and how to navigate. But sometimes we allow that to become a noose, a trap. And we say, no, 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 we can't do something else because we studied this. You studying this like means honestly, it means that you were like passionate about something. You were interested in and you were happy to nerd out about this thing. In building the skill of learning, you decided to do that in this one thing. That is all that your education means. It does not mean that now that you've built the skill of learning, you cannot do anything else. That's not what that means, right? So go look at your transcript if that's helpful for you and if you're also close enough to it. But like, if you cannot remember half of the classes that you took, that doesn't mean the degree was useless or that you must immediately flee your profession. Like, memory's memory, but it may mean that the name of the degree is no longer the most accurate explanation of what you can do today. And that is actually a really good sign, because what that's showing you is that yes, you learned this skill, but you've evolved it in the real world. Your current work, your repeated patterns, and the results people receive from you may tell us more than what a piece of paper does. Right? Especially depending on when you got your degree. Like, if you got it when you were young and you were just kind of like, I need to go to college, so let me do this. You're a very different person now that you actually have real work experience under your belt. So going back to that final interview, the reason that final interview question shook me was that at the time I was still partly evaluating myself through the same external labels the CEO was evaluating. He saw nonprofit, he saw government, he saw schools. And behind those labels, he may have seen bureaucracy, slow process, and someone who understood people but might not understand technology or business. And I had to show him something that labels could not show. I had to show him translation. You see how I use my own job skill in my own life? I had to show him that the place where I learned the skill was not the only place where the skill could create value. And as you probably figured out by now, I got the job. And in that role, I was hired as like a partnership manager. I went from partnership manager to UX designer to marketing. I did so many roles in that. And that's also why I love startups, because startups really allow you to flex this muscle of understanding what your seat is and what your through line is. And I've since worked at two technology companies, received multiple promotions, and I've supported teams at major companies as clients. So the thing I feared I could not become actually became a place or evidence of my growth. So his question and my doubt was actually completely reasonable, right? Like, he had no evidence to show that I can survive in tech. I had none either, but I figured I could do it because like we knew that a new industry has different expectations, language, tools, and pressures. And we know that there are real gaps to close. We both knew that. But a gap is not the same thing as an absence, right? You can learn the industry without erasing everything you already know. I learned tech and everything that had to do, but I did not have to erase all my nonprofit government's education. I didn't have to do that. I'd learned skills there that I can now use here without feeling bad because I was changing the label, right? So you can be new to the environments without being new to the underlying work. So if your experience currently looks like a hodgepodge, I want you to stop forcing it into a perfect straight line. Look for the pattern. Ask yourself three questions. One, what do people consistently receive from me? Two, what am I doing underneath the task? Three, where else is the result needed? People may read your labels, your job titles, and decide they know the limits of your story. And it's your job to show differently. One of my favorite folklore animals is Anansi the spider. And Anansi did not win because he was the biggest or strongest person in every story. He won because he could see another route. Your job title tells us where your ability has been planted. It does not tell us how far that ability can travel, how deep those roots can go, how high that tree can go. It does not tell us that. It does not tell us how far that ability can travel. Even think about the ocean, how deep the ocean is. So there's so much depth in the ocean, and it goes so far. We live on this rotating planet that is mostly water, right? You can go so deep and you can go so wide. Just because someone labels you as water, period. What does that mean? Show them your depth. If someone labels you tree, show them the depth of your roots. Show them how high your branches can go, because you are the only person who knows that your pattern. And as you grow and as you build connections, other people will help you spot it, whether the coaches, colleagues, etc. But you're the one that knows your full through line, and you also know through line, and you also know your why. So tell me in the comments, what do people consistently rely on you to make easier, clearer, or better? And what might that reveal about the work you have really been doing all along? Okay, thank you for watching this far. I want to hear from you. Bye.